It's good to see y'all. My name is Rodney McMillan. I'm the chair of the art department here at UCLA, and it's wonderful to see you. I guess before we get started, I just want to say that we're going to be having Graduate Open Studios on May 31st at Levin Studios in Culver City, and it's from 5 to 7, so I hope you all can join us for that. And so without further ado, it's my great pleasure to introduce you all to Cosmo Whyte. In many ways, I can make the same observations about Cosmo as I did for Galare Koshkazaran just a few weeks back. And that was that you could learn a lot about a person by the company that they keep. In Cosmo's case, it would be his close ties to the amazing Ebony Patterson, an artist I met years ago in New York. We were in a show together. We were on different floors. And she has like the most keen eye and an earnestness, which I also have seen in Cosmo in the past couple of years. And this is also matched by his sister, Robin Whyte, a colleague of ours, but who is also a writer in her own right. And I think we should also thank Ebony, too, because she encouraged him to apply for this job. So if you're watching this at some point, Ebony, thank you. So Cosmo hails from Jamaica and is a multidisciplinary artist using painting, drawing, and sculpture to explore conceptual themes of post-colonial identity, migration, and displacement. As an educator, his interests are centered on teaching students critical thought, coupled with developing their command of visual languages and skills. He received his BFA from Bennington College in Vermont in 2001, and in 2005 he received a post-baccalaureate certificate from the Maryland Institute College of Art. And in 2015 he received his MFA from the University of Michigan. Professor Whyte joined the faculty in the Department of Art as an assistant professor in July of 2022. Prior to joining the UCLA Art Department, Professor Whyte was an assistant professor at the College of Fine Arts at Florida State University in Tallahassee, Florida. And from 2015 to 2020, he was a visual art lecturer at Morehouse College, which is an HBCU, which stands for Historically Black University and Colleges and Universities. And the last 2 years of him serving there, he was the visual arts program director. Professor Whyte has had several significant solo exhibitions. In January 25 of this year, Cosmo opened The Mother's Tongue, Pressed to the Grinding Stone, and that was at the Arts Club of Chicago. In 2023, he had his second solo exhibition with Anat Ebji Gallery here in Los Angeles, and it was titled Hush Now, Don't Explain. And in 2019, he opened Beneath Its Tongue, The Fish Rolls the Hook to Sharpen Its Cadence. And that was at MOCA Georgia in Atlanta. Cosmo has exhibited in numerous group exhibitions and biennials, both nationally and internationally. In 24, his work was included in La Triennial Flow States, which was at El Museo del Barrio in New York. In 2023, he was in a show at the Montreso Art Foundation in Marrakesh, Morocco, and it was titled In Discipline, Blackness. He participated in Prospect 5 in New Orleans in 22, and in that same year, he was in Forecast Form, Art in the Caribbean Diaspora, 1990s to today. And that was at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. In 2020, Professor Whyte participated in the Jamaica Biennial, the 13th Havana Biennial, and in a show called The Sea is History at the Museum of Cultural History in Oslo, Norway. His work has been included in group exhibitions at the Drawing Center in New York, the Somerset House in London, the Museum of Latin American Art here in Los Angeles, and the Pompidou Center in Paris. His work is in several museum collections, including the High Museum in Atlanta, Georgia, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, the International African American Museum in Charlotte, North Carolina, the National Gallery of Jamaica, and the Perez Art Museum in Miami, and that's just to name a few. Please join me in a warm welcome to Cosmo Whyte, a great friend and colleague. Thanks so much.
So first off, thank you, Rodney. Thank you to the Hammer Museum, and thank you to the UCLA Department of Art. and thank you all for being here. So, before I jump into the slides, I just want to kind of give you an overview of how I'm thinking through this lecture. I've kind of organized the slides into, or organized my body of work into these three categories that I consider to be quite porous. So they're not fixed. Some works relate to other categories, and there's a lot of slides. So we're gonna try to get through this in a timely fashion. And also considering the fact that there's so many students in the audience, I have included work that predates grad school as well. But I'm including those works specifically as they relate to questions that I'm thinking through currently in my practice. So let's jump in. All right. I love Stuart Hall. I always like to start off with this quote from Stuart Hall: "An archive may largely be about the past, but it always rereads in light of the present and the future." So in terms of the questions that I've, or the question that I've been grappling with in the studio of late, if we consider the archive as this stifling container, an organizer of the living, breathing, shifting body of time, and I'm thinking about time both as the past, present, future, then how can we reanimate the complexities of this interior body so as to breach the rigid contours of this encasement? So in other words, if we consider the archive as living, breathing, shifting, then how can we understand the complexities of the body as a breach to the rigid contours of this archive? So that brings us to this early work. They operate both as photographs, but also documentations of performances that I did. And this was, like I said, predates grad school. So this was part of my graduate school portfolio. So it was a combination of these and drawings and paintings. And this was an early work in which I'm exploring archive as it relates to the body. Here I'm working with a collection of my, at this point, 2019, my relatively recently deceased father's ties. So I'm left with this trove of heirlooms and trying to figure out how does one engage with this archive? How does this archive intersect with the body? How does this archive change once the body is interacting with them? So it's a combination of, like I said, these performances, but also creating these wearable sculptures and then doing these performances with the work. All right, so the first category we're going to talk about is a threshold, and I'm thinking of archives as both a threshold and a site of disturbance. All right. So this first piece is called The Fire Next Time. The title is in ode to the 1963 book of essays by James Baldwin. This piece is the first in a series of large hand-painted beaded curtains depicting reformulated archival images. The nickel-plated beads are each hand-painted to collectively represent an archival image, in this case, of the 1981 Black protests in London, often referred to as the Brixton Riots. Operating somewhere between painting and sculpture, this beaded curtain is an invitation and at times a requirement for the viewer to physically enter and pass through excerpts of the archives. Through the momentary disruption of the legibility of the image, the viewer's movements disorders the traditional relationship of the body to the work of art, turning the body into an agent of interference rather than a reception of the work. And this should be a video. I think it should be playing shortly. All right, so In 2015, historian Eddie Chambers wrote an essay called Through the Wire, Black British People and the Riot. And he was talking specifically within this essay about the proliferation of images similar to this and how those images shaped the discourse around Black protests in London. And he was also talking about the media and, by extension, the Crown's disregard for Black life. And I was fascinated by this. I've seen this before. I've seen it in the American context. I've seen it in a Caribbean context in which these images then shape the entire discourse around a moment of protest. And for this exhibition, it was an opportunity for the viewer this is the first thing that they would encounter before they can get to see the rest of the show. And it becomes a moment of negotiating. Is this an image I actually want to walk through? And then once passing through it and momentarily disrupting the tendency of the camera to capture, they are then encountering other works that recontextualize the image that they first encountered. Another thing that fascinated me about this image is that there was a practice in which, during this period of time in London, photographers would opt to remain anonymous when documenting these moments of protest. So there is this tension between the desire to be anonymous by the photographer and the demand or the necessity of anonymity for the protester. So I am interested in that moment of tension. So, yeah. So around that time, I was also making this piece. It's a charcoal drawing. The title is "You Are in the Burning Car Beneath the Highway." That comes from a line in a poem, and the poem is entitled "For Black Children at the End of the World and the Beginning" by Roger Reeves, and that was written in June 2020. So what you're looking at here is is a drawing engaging with an image from the Brixton riots again. It's another archival image. However, during the course of the drawing, Rashard Brooks was shot in Atlanta. He fell asleep at the Wendy's. Someone called the police on him. He was shot by a police officer. And my intentions were never to write in the margins of the drawings. It was a moment of just pure frustration. The drawing was always meant to be cropped eventually. And I just instinctively wrote in the margins. And as both my neighborhood and the city was kind of engulfed in protests, I just kept writing in the margins. And that led to this kind of forensic annotations. And what I find interesting about this is then you have this drawing that is depicting a protest in 1981 with writings from 2020. So there's like a collapse of time that happens within the drawing. All right. So this piece is called the Agitation 2 Whaler and the Griot. These drawings, some of these drawings within my body of work reference photographs in public circulations found in archives or from my own personal collection. Strategies such as obfuscation through collage, scratching away at the drawing substrate, annotations, pixelations, juxtapositions with intentionally slippery legibility explores themes of fugitivity and opacity. These drawings offer realms of privacy or escape routes for the imperative of hypervisibility to the represented subjects and ask viewers to grapple with their desire to look. The drawings navigate the space between the rights to representation and the rights to opacity, seeking to avoid capture by either, instead staying in motion between the two. All right, so the next two pieces I'm going to show you came about through a conversation that happened two and a half years ago. So I was talking with David Scott, who is a Jamaican academic who also wears many hats. He was, at the time we were having this conversation, the curator of the 2022 Jamaica Biennial. He's also the editor of Small Acts, which is a Jamaican journal, and he's a professor of anthropology at Columbia University. And we were talking about the potential of a piece to be shown in Jamaica, and I specifically was interested in what has often been referred to as the Rodney riots in Jamaica. So this piece is called Persona Non Grata, and in October 1968, the Jamaican government, led by Prime Minister Hugh Sherrill, they were facing incredible social and political turmoil. To paint you a picture, it's 6 years out of independence. You're still grappling with the waning euphoria of post-independence. There's disenfranchisement with the new ruling class and how aligned they are with the former colonial Brits. And so you create this tension within the society, and the riots are in reference to the Guyanese Pan-African socialist Walter Rodney, who was a professor at the University of the West Indies at the time, and his political his emphasis on revolutionary politics was at odds with the government. And at some point in that October of that year, the government banned him. He was returning from a conference of black writers in Canada, and he was deemed persona non grata, not allowed back into the country. This led to the student protests, which is the largest in Jamaican history, well, one of the largest in Jamaican history. And this was a piece that, like I said, had been in conversation for over two and a half years. And it went through a number of iterations. So this first one is called Persona Non Grata. And it was shown here at Museo del Barrio. And the second version is called Ballad for Rodney, and this is it installed at the Arts Club in Chicago. Two very different approaches. The first one, I'll go back. The first one, the intention is that it's at the threshold of the exhibition. You're intended to walk through it, disrupt the image. The second one, I wanted it to feel a little bit more intimate. And as Rodney mentioned, I had spent some time teaching at Morehouse College. And within that AUC system, there's a shared library called the Woodruff Library. And at that library, it has one of the larger collections of the Walter Rodney papers gifted by the family. And so in preparation for this show, I spent some time in that archive just kind of going through all of his correspondence. And for this particular curtain, I wanted it to be smaller. I still wanted to maintain this sense of touch. But what you're seeing here are two etchings of his correspondence in glass. And in order to read them, you have to physically move the curtain aside. This one is particularly, I found it particularly intimate. It's by James Turner, a faculty at Cornell, writing to Ricky Singh, editor of the Caribbean Context, detailing an enclosed money order of funds raised by several individuals for Walter Rodney's widow, Pat Rodney, after his assassination in Guyana. All right, and here's a larger view of the exhibition at the Arts Club. So just a large overview of how I was thinking through this particular exhibition. So the title of the show is A Mother's Tongue Pressed to the Grinding Stone. And what I wanted to do with this particular exhibition was to situate my personal archives with the more public archives, and use that as a structural ground for an intervention and interrogation into spaces and forms of diasporic protest, spectacle, and witnessing. The witnessing part was a question that I've been grappling with for a while. Now, earlier I talked about doing that drawing, You Are in the Burning Car Beneath the Highway, and beyond, if we were to look beyond that, just the annotations, it was a quite profound experience to be immersed in a protest with no exit. It's, when it was time to go to sleep, you would hear the helicopters overhead. The National Guards were deployed outside my front door. It was all engulfing. And one of the things that struck me was the ways in which hostile architecture is employed during a protest. So in discussion with the folks at the Arts Club, the curator at the Arts Club, we discussed, my first proposal was to, in fact, board up all of the windows and recreate that sensation of being inside something and having to grapple with it and to sit and question, what does it mean to be a witness? What are the responsibilities there? But through discussions, we reached what I deem a poetic compromise, where I was also looking at these Caribbean burglar bars. And just a side note, before I moved to LA, I was living, as Rodney had also mentioned, in Tallahassee, Florida, and the house I was living in had recently gone through a renovation, and the landlord was going to throw out all of these burglar bars, and I had convinced him to give me all of them. So I traveled across the country with something like 30 burglar bars. But I've always found them interesting in that they hide in plain sight. They're a reminder of the threshold between the outside and the inside, the dangers of the outside. It acts both as protection, but then also as a beautiful prison. And so I wanted to combine the two, and what you ended up with are these boarded up windows that the negative space becomes the burglar bars. What I was not anticipating was that, it did anticipate the reflection happening on the floor. What I did not anticipate was throughout the day, you're treated to this light show as the sun moves across the gallery space. So they almost serve as like sundials as well. So that was a pleasant surprise. And also in this show, there was a combination of curtains that were just text. Here's the drawing in situ. Yeah. And then there's this abstract drawing as well, again, using the burglar bars that I moved across country with as a stencil. I started creating these abstract pieces that are what I consider to be in conversation with these boarded up pieces here. So this is just in terms of materials, what you're looking at here is charcoal, paint, black glitter, and in some cases charcoal dust. Charcoal and graphite dust with modeling paste. And the white that you're seeing here is just the negative space that's left back from the grill as stencil. All right, so this next piece, 4/4 timing. So 4/4 timing, Hush Don't Explain, situates the architectural archive of my late father as a structural grounds for an intervention and interrogation into the space and forms of diasporic protests, spectacle, and witnessing. Steel frames pulled from my father's unrealized architectural drawings, and I'll explain that more a little bit later. House these hand-painted curtains of reformulated archival images, what reads as young men lying stretched out, their hands behind their heads, are in fact demonstrators marking the one-year anniversary of the shooting of Mike Brown by staging a die-in along the streets of Ferguson in 2015. By weaving the personal histories with the historic narratives, the intimate with the public, I'm attempting to collapse the gap between our unique and shared narratives while asking what makes a witness and what does it mean to have become one. And here's, so I've done a few of these talks for like the Summer Institute, and the feedback that I've gotten from the students is I need more in-studio shots. So here we are, more in-studio shots. So this is the curtain in progress in the studio. This is an example of one of my father's architectural drawings. So when I talk about unrealized drawings, my father was an architect in Jamaica, and I was looking at that period of time in which he did the drawings before he passed away, but didn't get to see them finished. Those buildings went on to be made, but he didn't get to witness them. And I was also thinking about, as I was looking at each one of these drawings, what are the thresholds that I would want to activate? And it became an amalgamation of a number of different drawings. Here are some mock-ups done by my studio assistant at the time, Ariana Polat. If she's here, big ups to you. Here's another, and I would just like to know that both of these two mock-ups were actualized at some point, or realized at some point. Here's the work being installed for my show at Adnak FG's gallery in, 2022. Yeah. And I was also, growing up in the Caribbean, it's common to see buildings in these varying states of completion. So you've become comfortable with this notion of porous architecture. It's okay to see the landscape through portions of the building, and it upends a more Western notion of what constitutes an inhabitable building, because it doesn't require full enclosement for it to be a functioning building. And I wanted to also think through that. So there are moments within the install where things are left porous like the beads, but the line of sight to other works are purposeful. Yeah. And here's someone walking through the curtain, and here's it installed at the Arts Club in Chicago. All right. For the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about every single piece. This is another curtain, Waiting in the Wake. Again, another studio shot. So this was my studio up in Atlanta, much smaller space, no windows, which don't spray paint and no windows. Yeah. And I had to be creative in terms of how one could hang the work and be able to paint both sides. Here's the work installed. All right. Now we get to talk about crickets. Um, it's kind of this running joke for people who know me really well that I'm a big cricket fan. Some would say it's a unhealthy relationship. But I want to talk a little bit about why. Actually, it's a strange sport. It takes 5 days for one game. You break for tea time. But it was I used to go to the cricket matches as a child, right? And it was a space that I understood even as that child, that the cricket field was the arena in which colonial grievances could be aired out. It was a space in which nation building, identity formation was happening. And most importantly for me, it was a space in which I was hearing discourse, anti-colonial discourse happening amongst the adults around me, right? And it was a space in which I learned to embrace the complexities of my country and the contradictions, right? Where we, in the same breath, we can be talking about the apartheid struggles in South Africa and then debating over whether or not one should put condensed milk in tea for the mandatory tea time that's coming up. And all of that exists within the same plane. And there have been many scholars, most notably CLR James from Trinidad, the late CLR James, who've talked about the importance of cricket as being more than just a sport, but a space for which formerly colonized people could assert themselves and push against, use the sport that was designed to be part of the British cultural imperial system and turn it on its head. So, yeah, I love it. But I'm strategic in how I invoke it within the work. I'm not interested in creating pieces that can slip easily into like an illustration of a cricket match. I'm more interested in that nuance of this space in which, like I mentioned, the crowd, the colonial discourse that happens with them. So this is an install from Prospect 5. And I invoked the crowd in this piece called Flash Your Horn and Show Your Second Skin. I was thinking about that crowd that I grew to love as a child. And I was thinking about the role of spectator versus witness. It did not feel like we were merely passive spectators watching a game that goes on for 5 long days, right? It felt there was something more at play. And it was also a space in which it was the only space in which I saw the kind of black and brown solidarity playing out in full spectrum, right? And so cricket. And here's, to give you a sense of scale of the piece. And I wanted it to feel like this crowd was imposing. And that's another thing too, and I'll talk about it more once we get to the curtain, that you had to walk through to get in the space. I wanted it to feel like you were engulfed in this space in which all of these black people were looking at you. All right, so Enigma of Arrival is kind of this open-ended body of work that I've been doing for a number of years now. And not exclusively, but predominantly sculptural, in which I'm thinking through migration, I'm thinking through displacement. This particular piece that you're looking at is an airplane chair that has been reupholstered to look like my grandmother's or a grandmother's living room sofa, complete with the plastic over it. And then it's sitting on a shipping pallet and a bed of broken china. And thinking about, for me, I mean, I'm a homebody, and it just, migration feels like such a disruption to the domestic, or is one of the ways I feel it so acutely. So the broken china becomes like this kind of disruption of my domestic space. Another piece here is called Soul Imperial. You'll notice that there are 3 dates. There's 2015, 2019, and TBD. This was always conceived to have 3 scores. This was part of my MFA thesis project. So it was this accompanied with another sound piece and large-scale drawings. And the 2015 score was done while I was in grad school. I wrote a grant through the University of Michigan to travel. Well, before I get to that, I just need to mention that this work is in dialogue with Jamaican sound system culture, which has also migrated as well. This is it in London, here in Kingston, Jamaica. Back to the project. I wrote a grant to travel the transatlantic triangle and kind of map what Paul Gilroy would refer to as the Black Atlantic. So that was the forward-facing application. Privately, I was also going through my parents' photo album and trying to map their own migration. My parents met in London, so I wanted to see those places. My father at one point studied in Ghana. I wanted to see those places. Also, it was around the time, and I might date myself, but it was around the time when I think Facebook might have been at its height, and I share the same name as my late father, and I was getting a lot of emails from these Ghanaian men around his age being like, we only know this one Cosmo Whyte. Who exactly are you? And it turns out they were his classmates when he was in college. So it was an opportunity to then go there and see them. And the piece culminates in these diegetic sounds or audio field notes of me traveling to these different locations, paying specific attention to the shorelines as well. So that's the first score. The second score is an interview of my uncle, who his name is Patrick Johnson, my mother's brother, fantastic storyteller. But he grew up. Both he and my mother grew up in an area in Jamaica that disproportionately produced a number of prominent reggae artists, and he's a fantastic storyteller. Particularly once we started drinking and talking, and he would slip into patois, which is a Jamaican dialect, and how the piece is structured as he gets deeper and deeper into patois. I'm removing layers from the speaker, so at the very end, you have to get up real close to kind of understand what he's saying. But he's talking about the prompt was to talk about dub culture in Jamaica, the genesis of the distortion that comes from dub and reggae music. And he then launches into the story about this sound system called Soul Imperial in the neighborhood and how it fed the whole ecosystem of the neighborhood and was a sustaining force within the neighborhood, but would travel from house to house in hosting parties and would drive the local economy. So, I named the piece Soul Imperial in ode to that. Another sound system piece. Due to time, won't get too deep into this. This piece is done in 2024. It's called Flags of Convenience. Really quickly, flags of convenience is a practice by which ships, typically cruise ships or freight ships, use temporary flags to go through, to cross national borders and circumvent paying taxes to those different countries. It's particularly exploited in the Caribbean vis-a-vis cruise ships. And what you're looking at here are these archival photographs that have been reprinted on synthetic silk of different, some of them are photographs I've taken of the Atlantic. Some of them are archival photos from practices that no longer exist, in which tourists would toss coins overboard, and the local folks would be on boats and and they would dive for the coins and all of that stuff. So that's what you're looking here. But that is kind of, I mean, you could see some of it here, but for the most part, that is rendered kind of opaque. I was, trying to create a new narrative using this this system of exploitation. And as I'm making that, I'm also thinking through different ways of drawing. Here, the charcoal and graphite are grounded up into paste, applied. In some cases with the palette brush. I'm thinking as I'm making these of the wakes that are made from ships. But also you have moments in which I'm scraping into the paper, or I'm standing on ladders and throwing charcoal down onto the drawing to create these moments of like heavy deposits. Just trying different forms of mark making here. This is another one, Enigma of Arrival. Again, we don't have a lot of time to talk through it, but what you're looking at here is a life vest encrusted in mussel shells. The mussel shells were acquired through multiple means. One main source was through meals that I would cook and eat a lot of mussels. Yeah, and then this piece is called Salted Fish and Gold, Brixton, 2019. I was in Brixton Market in London in 2019, and Brixton has always been the space that has lived kind of in, I don't know what the term is, but it's been evoked so many times by relatives, particularly my relatives who live in London. My great aunt, who was part of the Windrush generation, talks about how Brixton was the mecca of British Caribbean-ness. And I was in the markets. I love markets. Any chance I get, I try to go to markets. But I kept walking across this salted fish, this huge carcass of a salted Norwegian codfish, and I just couldn't resist. So it was quite a sight to see me trekking through the London Tube with this huge carcass, and it smells like as you would expect. But I was drawn to it though because within the formation of a Jamaican national identity, Norwegian salted cod gets absorbed into Jamaican identity. So the national dish of Jamaica is ackee and saltfish. The salted cod was brought as a cheap source of protein for both the enslaved population and then the indentured labor ship afterwards. But I was interested in the ways in which these materials kind of hold these histories within it. And then along the spine, here's another shot of it, but along the spine of the piece are all of these gold mapping pins that are then placed within. And then kind of going back, this gilded top here is to like mimic the scales of the work. And then this piece is called Punch Drunk Love. Again, on that British trip, I was there during I think it's like the Jubilee celebration of Queen Elizabeth, one of them celebrations. And I remember being in in the Buckingham Palace gift shop and seeing the sugar bowl, replicas of the sugar bowl on sale. And again, it was one of those moments where I was just like, I got to do something with this. But also the initial response to seeing the sugar bowl is like a recoil in my body. I'm just like, oh my God. But then, figuring out something to do. So what you're seeing here is this shipping rope, the heavily braided shipping rope that's, and perched precariously on top of it is the replica of Queen Elizabeth's sugar bowl, and that's topped with rum. So when you enter into the space, you're also smelling rum. And then this accompanies these large drawings of these anthropomorphized braided rope figures, but I wanted it to be completely disorienting. Like, what's the front of the face? What's the back of the face? Why has the hair outgrown the hairline? What's going on here? And just to give you a sense of scale, they're quite large. All right, we're in the last section, home stretch. This particular section is called The Dragon Can't Dance. It's referencing a book by Lovelace, Trinidadian writer, around Carnival. I have to be honest, I was never big into Carnival when I was in Jamaica. It came coming to the US and just desperately wanting community to then embrace Carnival. But I always understood this idea of politics on lower frequency and Carnival embodying this idea where Carnival is not just a party. It's embedded within it is social critique, it's protest. All of this is happening within there. I wanted to engage with that, but I also was not, and I'm still not interested in making work about Carnival. I also feel that there's so many Caribbean artists who can do such a much better job at it than I can. I feel like Hugh Locke, I don't know how he did it. I'm not gonna try to compete with that. But again, there's this question of looking and what's interesting about Carnival is this theater of conflicting desires where you want to be seen but you want to remain anonymous. And so again, this question of witness, I feel like there's still something there to navigate through. Again, I don't have time to talk about every single piece. Or I just wanted to show, again, talking about surface. These drawings, particularly for like the undergrads who want to get into the weeds of stuff, I like to draw on printmaking paper. So cotton rag, Lenox is the preferred one, but I really beat up on this paper. So like I'm taking a power sander to it, I'm scraping into it, I'm layering. Sometimes I'll draw it to almost near completion and then sand it back and then draw it again, and then to see what kind of abstractions can emerge, or moments in which I am surprised. But also, I like when the work operates within a kind of a tight tonal range. So there's that. And then this brings me to newer work in which I am still doing these drawings that are heavily rendered, but then opting to completely cover it. And in this case, what you're looking at here is a photograph taken on my iPhone of my backyard in Florida just before I left. But And this piece is called Permutation Terra Incognitus, which means like new land. And this top area here is made from, again, charcoal and graphite dust grounded up into modeling paste and black glitter on it. And again, I want the work to have this tension between your desire to see the rest of it and my decision to cover a lot of it. Here, you can see up close. Here's another one. And so again, for Prospect, going back to the Prospect piece, this was a curtain that one had to walk through before. It's based on this archival photograph of a limbo dancer in Canada for Canada's Tropicana, which was Canada's response to Mardi Gras, but a carnival that centers the Caribbean population, right? But what I was struck by was this crowd, right? And I wanted to kind of invert this gaze. So you have this crowd here, you walk through the curtain, animating the static limbo dancer, but also thinking about like this pose that is held for so long. And then once you're on the inside of that curtain, you encounter a predominantly black gaze, black audience looking back at you. And for this work, I was also thinking about the ways in which I recognized New Orleans, having grown up in a part of Jamaica that is deemed a tourist capital, and what it means to have your backyard be someone else's playground, and that tension between how tourism necessitates that culture is performed in a particular type of way. So I was thinking a lot through that as well. And just very quickly, in doing my research for this show, I'm going to skip a little bit. There's this Jewish Jamaican artist named Isaac Menendez Belisario. I grew up doing field trips to the National Gallery in Jamaica and seeing this work constantly. It was like every Jamaican who's become an artist at some point has seen this work. And it's Menendez was documenting Jamaican Junkanoo Carnival on the eve of emancipation. But I learned that after that he migrated to New Orleans. So I decided, and this work is called The Cast of Characters, and is this almost anthropological illustrations of different forms of masquerading. And I decided with this work, I would make a response, and all of these figures here represents a different form of my reinterpretation of the cast of characters. And in the margins, there's even these like annotations and little ode to that history. And then more work. Some more work. And then these are the last two that I'm going to show. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't always know how to talk about these. This is a body of work that I keep returning to, and I don't know why. So, and I don't feel like I often hear artists say that, and I just want to say it, like, I keep returning to this body of work. I don't know why. What I've done, instead of like an explanation of it, it's, there's this definition of vessel. and the different interpretations of what that could mean. This is the second iteration of it. And then I just want to thank a few people. Some of these have been my studio assistants. Particularly the curtains, they're labor intensive. You're on scaffolding, you're turning beads, it's hard work, and I just want to shout out to those folks here on this list. So thank you. And that's it.
Yeah. There's time for about 4 questions, and there are ushers around who have microphones.
Hey.
Hey.
Awesome. It was really nice hearing like the just whole arc of all of this amazing work. So thank you for doing that. My question is sort of more practical. You talk about like moving a lot and sort of taking pieces and art and sort of like things that like I don't know, just like how do you go about like taking things with you and metaphorically and literally.
Yeah. I remember there was one time where everything could fit in a car, and that life felt so much simpler. I don't know if I'm equipped to answer that question. I just feel, particularly as I have started exploring sculpture more, it just has been more and more accumulation. And at some point you have to start just being discerning and for me, if I feel compelled to collect a particular material with the idea that I'm going to use it at some point down the line, and it's been 2 years, 3 years, and still nothing, then I have to start contemplating, well, maybe I don't hang on to this anymore. But also, there's something about having to move where, it forces you to make these hard decisions. Where there was quite a few things, like materials that I just left in Florida, that I was just like, I just can't take this with me. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay.
Thank you so much for your talk.
Yeah, no problem.
I really liked the last image, the vessel, and I wonder if you would entertain me thinking about 3 themes that I heard. What I really like about your talk is how you made the archive something very tangible, something very real, not abstract and academic, but a very porous boundary that we constantly negotiate. And with vessel, the first thing that I thought about was like the theme of the fractal, the way in which the surface is implicated metonymically within the kind of broader structure. Secondly, the marginalia, the way in which the marginal presses the question of the boundary. What is the object and what is the marginal? And third, the imprint, and the way in which the imprint challenges the very idea of the kind of primary object. And I see all of those themes in the vessel.
Maybe you should talk about it for me instead. Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah. We have one over here.
Hi, thank you
Hi.
for sharing all that. I wanted to ask, when you put these pieces out into the world, these things that are so historically resonant and often very heavy and dealing with all these sort of like unresolved conflicts or like, contradictions, like this is maybe too big a question, what's your hope for the impact of these things? Like, who is seeing them? Who do you want to see them? What do you want people to walk away from? Like, what's like that legacy aspect, I guess?
That's a good question. It varies. it really varies. There are times, for instance, the New Orleans for Prospect, a marker of success for me was the feedback I would hear from people who born and raised in New Orleans. And I remember, for instance, when I did a post back at Maryland Institute College of Art, the artist from New Orleans, Willie Birch, came, and I remember he came into my studio and literally like flipped all the tables and was just like, let's, free yourself, right? And I remember once I found out I was going to be in Prospect, I went specifically to New Orleans to go talk to him. And it meant so much when the exhibition was over. He came back and he was just like, I see what you were trying to do there. I respect that. So that was like a mark of success. In other cases, it's grappling with some of the questions that I'm grappling with, or if it triggers more questions, I'm less interested in presenting answers and just more questions. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was really fascinating. When you were showing the map and talking about moving around,
Yes.
you said something that I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about. You said something about paying attention to the shores, or maybe the shorelines. Mm-hmm. Do you have anything you want to say about that? Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things of growing up in a coastal city. I mean, you can almost feel like the shore, you can tell where the ocean is constantly. You can feel it behind your eyelids. But I was also thinking about different shorelines were conjuring different things for me. Like being on the shoreline in London was a different feeling from the shoreline in Ghana. Ghana there was more of this. It felt more melancholy. It was like this kind of natal dislocation from a culture, whereas London felt more about commerce and it felt colder in that sense. And then, so I was going to these different shorelines for different things, but the interesting thing about how it all sounds on an audio file is they all sound the same. So I was interested in that too, like what happens when they're all like layered on top of each other? What does, even though that they carry with them completely different meanings.